So this is the first of the cell videos, and here you can see some cells. And so what you're actually looking at, just to give you kind of an estimate, you can see this big round circle right here, this kind of dark pink. That is not a cell, that is actually a nucleus of a cell. And so here is the actual cell on the outside. And so that would be a eukaryotic cell. And then here you see these little tiny purple stained ones. These are actually prokaryotic cells, bacteria. So what we're going to do is go through some of the basics on the cell and what they're used for. So what we'll do is start and talk about cell theory. There's kind of 5 steps on cell theory. And so the cell is the smallest unit of life. We talked about that very early. Again, you can argue that may not be true. Viruses may be alive, but that's a whole other content. But right now, most basic biology books will tell you that it's true. Cells come from pre-existing cells, and that is also true. Cells do not just spontaneously generate. They always come from other things. There used to be this old tale I've heard people say, oh, don't feed your dog chocolate, it'll give them worms. That is not true. Unless there are worms in the chocolate, which whether the dog gets it than you. Again, chocolate's not good for dogs, especially dark chocolate. They don't have the enzymes necessary to break it down. It'll shut down their kidneys. But anyway, so what we really want you to get there is that, again, cells come from other cells. And if you're smart, and you're thinking about it, your big question is, well, where the hell did the first cell come from? And we will talk about that later. All right, the next one is all cells use energy and have a metabolism. So that's one of those properties of life. All cells have a plasma membrane, which separates the living from the non-living. And all cells have genetic information in the form of DNA. There are some viruses, and we don't talk a lot about this, but their genetic material actually is not DNA, but it's actually RNA. And so that's maybe another hit against viruses being alive, but again, those properties could change. All right, so we want to talk about cell size. This is a strange topic. I want to make sure you understand why. So they're showing you the range of cells here. The smallest bacteria, 100 nanometers. And then you're seeing some of the larger cells, a frog egg is pretty large, chicken eggs are pretty large. And nerve and muscle cells actually kind of push the envelope up here. So we're kind of following in this pathway. So the question is why? What limits cell size? Why, so the question, you're made out of millions of cells, and why aren't you just one big cell? Why aren't you just like an amoeba? That's a single cell organism. And so there are issues with size. So we want to look at what limits cell size. And what you have to understand is what limits how large a cell can get is what we call the surface area to volume ratio. And so I want you to kind of have the concept of what this is here. So surface area, to calculate area of like a cube, area is height times width times the number of sides. Volume, on the other hand, is length times width times height. So if I'm looking at something like this, and I'm trying to calculate these surface to area volume ratios, you end up with some issues. So here they're doing the one with 1. So you got 1 times 1 times 6 because there's 6 sides. So my total surface area is 6. My volume is 1 times 1 to 1, so it's 1. And then my surface area to volume ratio is 6. Okay, now as my cell gets bigger, here I have a 5 by 5 by 6, you multiply with 6 sides. So that's where I get my 150. But then I get my volume is 5 times 5 times 5. I get my 125. So all of a sudden that drops down to 1.2. So what I want you to notice between these first 2 columns, as that pops up, I'm not sure you can see that, but you want to realize that as my size of my cell gets larger, my surface area to volume ratio gets smaller. And the problem with that, because we haven't really talked about this topic yet, is things like diffusion. The way to support this cell, if this is a cell, things have to diffuse across. And you have to have some kind of gradient. Well, the problem is on something this small, that's real easy. But something bigger, it makes it very hard to get stuff into the middle of the cell to keep it alive. Because you have to set up gradients. So that will limit the size things can get. Now, if you think about it, how you get around that is here you've got something that look about the same size, but this one now is broken up into a lot of little tiny boxes. So you can set up gradients between these and have things, fluids move and solutes move, and you can get it back down to 6. So that's why we limit the size of the cells, at least how large they can get. And so I want to go back and think about some of the ones that are extremely kind of the largest are nerve and muscle cells. They kind of cheat. And how they do this is they actually are long and thin. So although they are bigger, what happens is the diffusion can happen sideways here. And that allows for things to get into parts of those cells. So it's kind of cheating the system. All right. What they don't really talk about much in your book, but I really want you to understand this is, if you go back here, even again, we see, the smallest bacteria. What limits how small they can get is basically they all need 2 things. They need DNA. They need their genetic material, which we saw from the cell theory. And then they also need at least 1 ribosome, which we haven't talked about yet. But a ribosome is the manufacturer of proteins. That's the structure that makes protein. So you have to have a DNA and at least 1 protein. So that has to fit into the cell. So that's going to kind of limit how small they can get. So I want you to have those concepts.